Meet Ken Kelly, a first-year social studies teacher to a group of ninth grade students. For 1 week, Ken lectured on communism and asked that the students go home and watch the news every day after class, so when they came back to school they could have an open discussion about what they saw in the news in relation to their text. But upon returning to school, the students were a little reluctant to participate in the class discussions. Based on the students' written assignments, Ken knew they knew their content, so he didn't understand why no one wanted to discuss in the class. So he chose a few students to answer questions, he corrected any wrong answers, and he discouraged interruptions if anyone spoke out of turn. And he always made sure he had the last word. So when Ken grew tired of asking his students to openly discuss in class, of course while upholding his many discussion standards, he became angry and gave them a pop quiz on the very thing he only wanted to openly discuss. He was frustrated and he was confused. They knew their content, they were all friends, why weren't they discussing? Then it hit him. He had an idea. He knew someone who could probably help. He was going to see Mrs. Avia, who taught 4th graders exclusively through open discussion. He was going to see how she worked. He sat with her class and realized the students sat in a circle. They spoke out of turn, and Mrs. Avia didn't do much talking herself. She left the discussion with a reminder of what the students last had for homework. They had to think if their lives would be different had they been given different names. This was a great caveat into the conversation about the text for that day. Some students talked about their lives at home while others talked about their lives in their skin. After witnessing Mrs. Avia have a successful open discussion, Ken was still very confused. He didn't understand how leading discussions could be considered teaching, how listening to students talk about themselves at home or inside their skin was contributory to their overall success in the classroom. He was confused. As a first-year teacher, Ken might need to learn a thing or two about human behavior before he fully understands his classroom and his students' interaction. So let's take a brief moment to discuss theories of psychology. There's behaviorism, social cognitive theory, social constructivism, and humanism. These might help Ken in his classroom. B.F. Skinner believed we could possibly reinforce behavior simply by adding or removing certain stimuli. And the more we reinforce, the more a person becomes conditioned to behave a certain way. Along the same lines as behaviorism, social cognitive says a person's environment, the person himself, and his behavior, they all directly affect one another, and that to monitor these, we have to self-regulate to keep them in tab. Piaget's cognitive theory says that before we can teach, we have to understand that people have different foundations of learning. And so some might be in disequilibrium while some have to adapt or accommodate or assimilate to learn. Not only should we take into account students' schemas, but Vygotsky believes we should also take into account their cultural upbringings. Just by immersing the student in their own culture or immersing ourselves, it makes teaching and learning easier. Humanism reminds us that our students are human. So if they're ever in a place where they can't effectively learn, it's probably because we haven't made them feel like their basic needs are being met. So how to do this is we share their interests, and we involve their family and immerse ourselves in their cultures to make them more comfortable. Let's talk about how Ken and Mrs. Avia might have used these theories. They both use behaviorism. Ken has conditioned his students to only speak when they've been spoken to, whereas Mrs. Avia has conditioned her students to speak freely in the classroom. She also uses the social cognitive theory because her students are self-regulating when they go home with critical thinking exercises and come back to discuss them later. Mrs. Avia used social constructivism scaffolding to introduce the students to a new concept using their cognitive schema associated with their names. This helped them better grasp the whole text that was asking them to think about who they are as people and why they're different. Ken mocks his students when they get questions wrong, so they probably feel like their basic need of safety hasn't been met. Now that we know some of the theories and we've seen Mrs. Avia put some to use, let's go tell Ken there's still hope for his classroom.
created using Powtoon.